Hi folks, how you doing? Welcome to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is on the body and justice. Yeah, let's get into it. So one of the first things that this chapter does is it starts to unpack some case studies that are relevant to this interaction between the body and health and the environment. The first tragedy that they look at is the tragedy of Bhopal, India, and Union Carbide. So Union Carbide had a fertilizer plant located in Bhopal, India. As you can imagine, a plant of this nature is not located where the wealthy live. It's located where the poor live. And this poor population doesn't have a choice of whether the Union Carbide plant is placed next to them. And that really speaks to one of the important concepts in this particular chapter and in overall concepts in environmental sociology, and that is how patterns of economy impact those who find themselves in less advantaged positions in society. These patterns of economy often overlap with patterns of technology and politics, and they really lay the foundations for patterns of environmental justice or environmental injustice, if you will. So Bhopal, India, what had happened was that this particular plant had been offline for many months for an overhaul of the technology, kind of going through and doing some upgrades on the plant. And as they were bringing the plant back online, a series of unfortunate events started to happen, and much due to operator error, especially operator error at the management level. The Union Carbide plant found itself in a position where a couple of the chemicals that were not supposed to come together actually came together, and they formed a noxious gas that could not be stopped from entering into the community itself, and ultimately resulted in tragic, terrible deaths of thousands of people in the overarching area that the Union Carbide plant was located in. Not only did it kill many people in their sleep, which according to the text that might have been a blessing in disguise, but it also created long-term health problems for those that were located in this area. So as you can imagine, these people were not compensated by, or if they were compensated, they were compensated in a very minimal way for the poisoning of them and their communities. We later found out that Union Carbide had been disposing of waste on this site in inappropriate ways, and so not only was the community being poisoned by a noxious gas that was tragically released in the bringing this plant back online, but the same community had been poisoned by this plant by dumping in inappropriate ways, and many of these toxins actually leaching into the water system itself. So as I mentioned before, because they're poor, they're very unlikely to have any compensation for what happened to them due to the union carbide gas spill. One of the concepts that's introduced in this particular chapter is the environment. And what is the environment? It's the zone of the body's perpetual dialogue with the environment. INVIRONMENT versus ENVIRONMENT. What these environmental issues are really getting at are issues that concern the dynamics of that dialogue, how health, food, and ecology all seem to go together. The term environment is an attempt to bring the human body back into the discussion of the environment. Too often we think of the environment as the realm that is out there, external and unrelated to our bodies. This chapter suggests that the frequent split between the public health and the environmental movements has its origins in part in this externalization of the environment as separate from the body. So, to quote the chapter, rather than speaking of the body and the environment, the author is suggesting that we speak of the environment and the environment, IN versus EN, where the environment refers to the zone of the body's perpetual dialogue with the environment. So as we move forward, this idea of the environment, that we are bodies that are interacting with the overarching environment in ways that we are part of, not apart from. They also talk about motilities and stabilities. When they do this, they talk about where your food comes from. And if you look at a plate of food that you're eating on any given meal, you realize that the food that you eat could be from great distances from where you are actually consuming it. They talk about how Castells is talking about spaces of flows, and that more and more interconnection is defining us, especially in reference to globalization, and that these environmental flows are somehow connected. Uri is talking about global fluids of people, ideas, and materials, and how those global fluids are streaming across the planet and connecting localities and bodies across the globe. We used to refer to this as what is local is global, and what is global is local. And within these motilities and stabilities, we're still searching for somewhat of a stability within our own environment, how our body is interacting with the environment that we find ourselves in. Speaking once again about the plate of food that you're eating, we see that if you're eating eggs, the eggs could come from somewhere local. The bacon could come from a hog farm in North Carolina. The cheese could come from someplace in Wisconsin. the wheat for the bread could come from someplace in Brazil, and the coffee beans could come from Costa Rica. And you can see how there is this larger interconnectedness between us and our food and the rest of the world that might not seem prevalent as we're consuming that food. Wendell Berry talks about invisible environments. He really gets into this idea of being aware that we are all downstream from somebody. And if that's the case, then maybe we need to rethink the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. Barry says, well, maybe we need to start saying do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. He wants us to remember that because of the body's perpetual dialogue with the environment, we're always living downstream of what goes on around us. And we always have to keep in mind that who gets what comes downstream is not always equal. So some people are more positioned to not receive the environmental ills that others don't have much choice other than to receive them. So those who find themselves living closest to the toxic output of our industrial economy are often the poor and disenfranchised of society, as we saw with the Union Carbide, Bhopal, India tragedy. Another important concept that we have to take in consideration when we move into the body and health is environmental racism. This is not just based on economics. It also includes social heritage. So those with more advantaged social heritage are less likely to experience threatened environments. An important concept that we might think of in reference to this is NIMBY, not in my backyard. We will not have toxic environments in our own backyards. Well, that's taken from an advantaged position. Not everybody can say we will not allow an environmental wasteland to take shape in our backyard. That comes from people who find themselves in positions of power. Social heritage differences in the distribution of environmental bads for the body. This is just the outcome of environmental racism, and it's either due to intentional or institutional reasons. Environmental racism is embedded in the institutional racism that we find in the United States and the way power is distributed within our society. Pesticides are another big concept that we have to wrap our minds around and our bodies around. In this particular chapter, we know that 71% of all pesticides in use are some degree of hazardous to us, to other living beings, and to the environment itself. And we know without a doubt that goes back at least 50 to 70 years that research links pesticide use to birth defects, fertility problems, neurological and mental problems, and cancer. As you dig more into the types of foods that you really should eat, we see over and over again that exposure to environmental pesticides and herbicides is extremely problematic to human health, and in many cases results in the listed side effects: birth defects, fertility problems, neurological and mental problems, and cancer.